In this class, we're going to look at the first lesson in Latin reading, but we're going to work through it a second time. This is going to be what I normally do in Latin reading, so let's just take a minute to think about what we're trying to do in Latin reading and how it's helpful. In each lesson, on the study center, each actual lesson, we have 5 verses of the Gospel of St. John in Latin. So we study 5 verses in every lesson. We have to learn the translation of those 5 verses from Latin into English, and then we want to be able to translate English back into Latin. So the first class for each lesson, we're going to work on the translation. In the second class for each lesson, we're going to go through the vocabulary that's listed in the exposition. And we're going to review the translation, but we're also going to spend time talking about the Latin vocabulary and learning more about the Latin vocabulary. So what we go over in this second video is not in the printed lesson. So this is going to be an advantage that you have from watching the videos that you wouldn't have if you were just studying the printed lesson. I can't write all of this stuff into the lessons. The lessons would be long and distracting. But in a video, we can talk about a lot of different things that we can't write in a lesson. So what we're going to do in this second class for lesson 1, even if you've studied the translation of lesson 1 before, I guarantee that you don't know all the stuff that I'm going to talk about. And I'd like you just to keep in your notes, I'd like you to keep a list as we go along. I'm going to take one of the translation vocabulary words and give some more information about it to help you really learn more about the vocabulary and master these translations. It'll be helpful for you in future translation lessons. So we'll just keep a list of some information that I share on each of the different words that we cover in this lesson. So in the first video, in the first class, we went through the translation of John chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. In principio erat verbum, et verbum erat apud Deum, et Deus erat verbum. Hoc erat in principio apud Deum. Omnia per ipsum facta sunt, et sine ipso factum est nihil, quod factum est. In ipso vita erat, et vita erat lux hominum, et lux in tenebris lucet, et tenebre eam non comprehenderunt. You should have been studying that translation since our last class and should be comfortable with the translation if you've been doing the translation exercises. In our first lesson, I talked about Latin pronunciation. I talked about the difference between classical and ecclesiastical pronunciation. And I said that when we're reading Christian writings like this Latin translation of the Gospel of John, we should read it with ecclesiastical pronunciation. There's one other note I want to make about pronunciation, just to help you with pronunciation. Anytime, one of the problems with pronunciation is that you'll see a word and you know how to pronounce all the letters, but you don't know how to accent the word correctly, right? And that can make your pronunciation clumsy. If you don't know which accent or which syllable is accented, it makes pronunciation clumsy. So just a couple of quick rules on the pronunciation and accentuation. If you have a Latin word that's only one syllable, like in, there's no accent. So that's obviously easy, right? There's no accent on a one-syllable word. But if you have a 2-syllable word, like factum, anytime you have a 2-syllable word, the first syllable is accented. So this would be pronounced factum, factum. Okay? Anytime there's a 2-syllable word, get this in your notes. Anytime there's a 2-syllable word, the first syllable is accented. That's pretty easy. A one-syllable word has no accent. A two-syllable word is accented on the first syllable. But when we get past two syllables, things get tricky. In our first translation, we've got a couple words that are more than two syllables. One word we have that's four syllables is principio. Principio. How would we know where to put the accent? Well, it's easy if you hear me read it and I read it correctly. You hear the pronunciation and you just imitate it, right? And when you hear me pronounce this word, you'll hear me put the accent over the second syllable. Principio, right? So it's easy when you hear someone speaking it, but there are going to be many words that you read in Latin that you've never heard someone read before. And it's going to be difficult to know where to put the accent. In this word here, we have let's divide it into syllables. Comprehenderunt. Comprehenderunt. 5 syllables. And if we look at that word and try to figure out where in the world does the accent go, again, it's easy if there's someone who has perfect pronunciation and we hear them read it or hear them say it. But what if we're just reading and we don't have a chance to hear anybody say it? And if we do hear someone say it, we don't know if they're right or not. Just because someone says this in a certain way doesn't mean that that's necessarily right. How can we actually know how it should be pronounced? And there's a rule. So it's not a mystery. We don't just have to guess. The rule is very simple. And I'm going to say, let's say with this word, comprehenderunt. Let's say we don't know. We don't know how to pronounce it. We've never heard it before. This is all we have. There's one question we have to ask that tells us how to pronounce it. We look at the second to last syllable. All right? Because in Latin words, like in two-syllable words, the accent tries to be on the second to last syllable. That's normal for Latin. Latin tries to put the accent on the second to last syllable. Okay? So Latin wants to accent this syllable. It wants to say comprehenderunt. That's what Latin wants to say. But there's a rule that makes it not able to say that sometimes. And we have to figure out how it's to be pronounced. And here's the key. If the vowel, or I should say if the syllable, the second to last syllable, if the syllable is long, and there's a couple different things that make a syllable long. If the syllable is long, then it has the accent. So we'd have to figure out if that E, or that A in Latin, if that A is long or short in the word. If it's long, then we would accent that syllable. If it's short, then we would accent that syllable. So if that's long, we would say comprehenderunt. Comprehenderunt. Latin wants to accent the second to last syllable, and if it's long, we can do so. Comprehenderunt. Okay? If that's long. But if that's not long, then the accent goes back one more syllable. Pay attention. Pay attention. If the syllable is short, if the second to last syllable is short, the accent moves back one more syllable. And that's what we see here. We have prin, chi, p, o. Latin would like to put the accent on the p. It would like to say principio. That's what it would like to say. But the problem is that this syllable is short. And so it can't put stress, it can't put accent on a short syllable. A short syllable is like an unimportant syllable. It can't put stress or accent on a short syllable. So the accent slides back one, and we say principio. Okay? So that's how you can tell where the accent should go. It should go on the second to last syllable if that syllable is long, and very often it is. And if that second to last syllable is not long, then it should slide back to the third, or the third to last syllable. Okay? And there are actually names. This second to last syllable is called the penult. The penultimate means the next to last. And this is called the antepenult syllable. Just so you know, there are names for these things, but that's not important. So the accent always wants to be on the second to last syllable unless it can't be, and it has to slide back to the third to last syllable. But it will never be back here. You will never say principio, right? You'll never say that. It's either principio or principio, but it can only be principio if that syllable is long. Okay, so that's a general rule. A general rule for pronunciation is the second to last syllable is accented if it's long, and if it's short, the third to last syllable is accented. Now, how can you know if that syllable is long or short? That's difficult. Okay? You're either going to have to look it up in a dictionary to see if that vowel is marked with a long symbol, or when you study the forms of grammar, you're going to see that different forms have long or short vowels, and that's going to help you make a judgment. There's one word that's a little tricky in our lesson. When I went over the translation, I said the pronunciation of this word isn't clear, because if we divide it into syllables, we get te, ne, and then the B and the R should be kept together because they form a smooth sound. It's called a blend. Bra, bra. Whenever you have a pair of consonants that you can speak at the beginning of a word, like brother, brother, those two letters are often kept together. They blend together. You don't have to have a vowel between them. Whenever you have two consonants like this together, usually that makes the syllable long. It means it makes it long to speak. But when we have te, ne, bris, it would feel like because we have length here, it would be tenebris. But actually, if we look in a prayer book, for example, and some old Catholic prayer books have all the accent marks written on all the words, they accent tenebris, tenebris, tenebris. Okay? So I just want you to see sometimes it's confusing, but there's a general rule to follow. We have 5 syllables, but not any of the 5 can be accented. There's only 2 that can be accented. It's either the second to last or the third to last. And the way that we figure that out is if this is short, then the accent slides back one. If this is long, then it's accented. You got that? All right? So just as an example, if we take the verb laudare, if you were to look up laudare, laudare, if you were to look that up in a dictionary, you would see that this a is long. That's why we say laudare, laudare. All right? If we took the verb ducere, if you look that up in a dictionary, you'll see that this e is short. So we don't say ducere, we say ducere, ducere. But if you look at another verb like docere, docere, if you look up this verb in the dictionary, you'll see that this e is long. So we say ducere for this verb, and we say docere for this verb. And the reason why is because the vowel in this verb is short because it's third conjugation. You'll learn about that later. The vowel in this second to last syllable is long because it's second conjugation. Again, you'll learn about that in grammar. But that's why the pronunciation is different. It has to do with the length of the vowels in the words. Okay? This means to lead. It's pronounced ducere. This means to teach. It's not pronounced docere. It's pronounced docere because of the vowel in the second to last syllable. Okay, so there is a way to figure out pronunciation. Sometimes, though, you have to use a dictionary. If you look it up in a dictionary, you'll see the long vowels are marked with a straight line over them, and that will help you to figure out how it should be pronounced. So I just want to explain that before we get going. Probably should have explained that when we talked about pronunciation. But that's the rule, okay? You don't have to hear someone say the word to know how to pronounce it. Right? So, having said that, I've already gone over the translation in the first video. In this video, like I said, I'd like to go through the vocabulary and offer you some information that's helpful about the vocabulary. This kind of study is called Latinity. In the old schools, it was called Latinitas. And what Latinitas means is just helpful information about the language that helps you to understand it and use it with more expertise. Okay, so it's just helpful Latin information, Latinitas. So let's go through the vocabulary. I'm going to switch over to my text here. In the first verse, we had in principio erat verbum, et verbum erat apud Deum, et Deus erat verbum. And we've gone over the translation. But let's look at the vocabulary. First, we have the word in. And what I'd like you to know, follow me here, the point is to learn these details. We'd like to identify the parts of speech for every word. Okay? We want to identify the parts of speech. And so we're going to start and go slowly, and then over time, this will get faster and faster. So when we look at the very first word in our translation, we have in principio, erat, verbum. All right? And let's look at these words one by one. When we start with this first word, in, what part of speech is in? There are 8 parts of speech we learned in grammar. What part of speech is in? One way that you can figure out the part of speech is to use the process of elimination. You can just think of the list of the parts of speech, and you can start with noun. Is in a noun? No. Is in a pronoun? No. Is in a verb? No. Is in a participle? No. So in is not one of the 4 declined parts of speech. And there's a simple key. Does in have any other forms? Are there any other forms for the word in? Or is there just one form? Is there just one form of the Latin word in? Yes, there's only one form. If there's only one form, that means it's not one of the first 4 parts of speech, because they have different forms. Remember, we learned the first 4 parts of speech are declined. They have different forms. So if you know that in only has one form, then you know it has to be one of the last 4 parts of speech. Preposition, adverb, interjection, conjunction. It's got to be one of those 4. And in is a preposition. Okay, so we want to identify the part of speech. Now we know that, from grammar, we know that any preposition comes before a noun, right? That's what preposition means. So when we have a preposition, it's going to be related to the noun that comes after it. Please pay attention to this. Anybody can just dum-dum their way through the translation. You have to understand more of the language. Pay attention to this. In is a preposition. When we learn about prepositions, we learn that prepositions are set before a noun. And they express a relation between this noun and the other nouns of the sentence. All right? So, principio is the noun that's related to this preposition. If you look in up in a Latin dictionary, and again, I know that you don't necessarily know Latin grammar yet because you're just getting started, but I just want you to follow me on this. If you look up this word in a Latin dictionary, it will tell you that this preposition is followed by a noun in a certain case. Prepositions cause the noun that follows the preposition has to be in a certain case. And the case helps you to read and translate the noun. If the preposition in is followed by a noun in the accusative case, then the meaning is into or unto or to. It has an idea of motion. When the noun after the preposition in is in the accusative, it has an idea of motion. Right? Like, I walk into the room. There's an idea of motion. If in is followed by a noun in the ablative case, it has the idea in. One is an idea in motion, one is an idea at rest. So the correct translation of this preposition is going to depend on the form of this noun. You don't just guess at it. You don't look at the dictionary, see all the different possible translations, and just guess one. You use grammar to help you decide how this preposition should be translated. And what we see here, when we study grammar, is that principio is a substantive noun, and the ending here is ablative. And so we're going to use this meaning of the preposition in, and that's why in our translation we say in the beginning, not into the beginning. All right? The form or the case of this noun tells us how to translate this preposition, because there are lots of options. If you look up the word in a Latin dictionary, there'll be a whole page of possible translations. We don't just guess. All right? So in this sentence, in is a preposition followed by, this is a noun, a substantive noun. So I'll write SN, substantive noun, and it's in the ablative case, and that's why we translate it as in the beginning. Okay? In other sentences, we'll see the preposition in, and it will have a different translation. And we'll see why when we get there. The next word in the sentence is principio, and if you look it up in a dictionary, you won't find it. Because the different cases of nouns are not in a dictionary. In order to find a noun in a dictionary, you have to know the nominative form of the noun. You have to know the declensions. Principio is a second declension neuter noun. So if you look it up in a dictionary, you won't find principio, you'll find principium. The accent right here. Principium. It's a second declension noun, and you'll learn what that means as you study grammar. It's a second declension noun. The number is singular. The gender is neuter. And the case in this sentence, principio, is ablative. So when you see a noun in Latin, you have to know a lot of information about that noun to translate it. Now, in these lessons in Latin Reading 1, I just tell you what the translation is. Okay? But this isn't just my translation. I don't just make stuff up. There's a reason for the translation. This noun has a meaning which you can look up in a dictionary. It means beginning. Principium means beginning. But when the form of the noun changes, the characteristics of the noun change, and that changes its translation. Principio is the ablative form, and it's called the object of the preposition. When a noun follows a preposition, it's called the object of the preposition. Okay? And this whole thing together is called a prepositional phrase. So this is called a prepositional phrase. This noun is called the object of the preposition. And when we translate, we treat this like one part of the sentence. You see that? The preposition and its noun are treated like one part of the sentence. You got that? In principio erat verbum. This is a prepositional phrase. It's made up of a preposition and the object of that preposition. And this expresses a relationship between this noun and the rest of the sentence. Okay, so every time we see a preposition, we're going to see the preposition, and then we're going to see a noun right after the preposition. That's called a prepositional phrase. The noun is called the object of the preposition, and the preposition determines what form the noun uses. And we'll see this. You got that? So far, we're through 2 words. And you see there's a lot of information packed into that Latin, right? Just 2 words, but there's a lot of grammatical information packed in there that we need to understand to translate it. And so we translate it in the beginning. That's a prepositional phrase. And we add the article the because in English, we don't say beginning, we say the beginning. All right? We put the in parentheses because there is no the in the Latin text. And when we go from English to Latin, we don't want this word the floating around to confuse us and make us think we have to figure out how to translate the when it's not there. Okay? So we put it in parentheses to show us that we added this for our translation, but it doesn't actually come from the Latin. All right? In the beginning. In principio. So in is a preposition. It's placed before a substantive noun. The preposition determines what case the noun is in, and that determines the translation. And we'll see examples of how that changes in different phrases. Next we have erat. Erat is a verb. It's a word that expresses doing something, being, or suffering some action. Erat is a verb. The other way that we can tell that erat is a verb is that it expresses time. Right? I tell you in the lesson that erat is translated as was. What does was tell us about time? Past tense, right? So this word erat expresses an idea of time. It introduces time to this idea of this sentence. Erat, it's past tense. Now, it's a verb, and if you were to look up in a dictionary, erat, you would not find it. It's not in the dictionary. Because this is the form of a verb, and the forms of the verbs are not in dictionaries. So you would not be able to find this word in a dictionary unless you knew where it came from. Okay? This verb erat is a form of the verb esse, which means to be. In the present tense, this verb to be has these forms. Sum means I am. Es means you are. Est means he or she or it, some third person, is. I'll just write he is. But he there represents any person. He, she, it, Julius is, any individual third person, est. Sumus means we are. Estis means you, all, plural, are. And then lastly, sunt means they are. These are the present tense forms of the verb esse. So if you took sum and looked it up in a dictionary, you would find it. Because this first present form is what's put in the dictionary. So in order to find the meaning of this word, you would have to look up this word. How would you ever figure out to do that? In order to know the meaning of the word erat, you would have to get the dictionary and turn to the section with words that begin with S to find the meaning of erat. So the dictionary is not going to help you, right? Because we have to study grammar to know the verb that the form it belongs to. We have to study grammar in order to be able to translate Latin. You have to know, as a student, that that verb erat is from the verb sum. And the only way you're going to know that is by studying grammar. So you can sit here in Latin Reading 1, and you can just read the lesson, and it says, erat is a verb that means was. But you have no clue why. You have to study grammar in order to understand, how do I know that erat means was? Well, I'll show you. Ready? These are the present tense forms of the verb esse, which means to be. These are the present tense forms. Now, we said this is past tense. It introduces past time. Well, there's another tense called the imperfect. The imperfect tense means the not complete tense. It talks about past activities that aren't necessarily complete. Right? Like if I said to you, when I was a kid, when I was a kid, I used to run. When I was a kid, I loved baseball. That's a better example. When I was a kid, I loved baseball. Do I still love baseball? Yes. Yeah, I still love baseball. I loved baseball, but is my love of baseball complete? No. Was my love of baseball past? In the past? Yes. It was in the past, but it's not necessarily complete. You see that? That's the idea of the imperfect tense. Past tense, but not necessarily complete. There are other past tense verbs that are past tense and complete. They're called the perfect tense. Perfect means complete. So if I say, in 1993, I graduated high school. I graduated high school. Is that past tense? Is that complete or incomplete? It's complete. That's a different tense. That's called the perfect tense. It's a past complete idea. The imperfect is a past idea that's not necessarily complete. Okay? When I was a kid, I showered every day. Hopefully that's not complete, right? Hopefully I still shower every day. Past tense, complete. Past tense, not complete. There's an important difference, all right? If it's not complete, it's called the imperfect tense. This verb here is an example of an imperfect tense. In the beginning was the word. So the imperfect tense, follow me here, we'll see where this verb comes from. Eram means I was. Eras means you were. Erat means he, she, or it was. And that's where our verb form comes from. Okay? So if a student memorizes, this is called the conjugation, all the forms of a verb. If a student memorizes all the forms of a verb, he will see erat in the sentence and know that erat is one of the forms of the verb esse. He will know that it's an imperfect form. He will know that it's the third person singular and that it's translated he, she, or it was. All of that information comes from his study of grammar. You got that? And in Latin grammar, we'll study all of these conjugations and forms of verbs. We'll learn all these things. All of that information is packed in this word. And that's what makes Latin a very useful language, but also a difficult language. All of that information is packed into those 4 letters. All right? So we see where that word comes from. We see what that form means. And that's why we translate it as, in the beginning, it was. It was. It's imperfect. So if we say, in the beginning was the word, does that mean that the word is no longer? That would be perfect, right? But this is imperfect. So we're saying that in the beginning, in the past, the word existed. The word was. But we're not saying he stopped existing. It's imperfect. In the beginning, there's our prepositional phrase, our preposition and the object of the preposition. Now we have our verb, and our study of grammar will tell us exactly what that verb means. It means it was. And we have to ask the question, what is the it? What was? The answer to that question will be the subject. Every verb has a subject. Every verb has a subject that is either doing the action, being, or is receiving the action. Every verb has a subject. If we know that that's third person singular, it can be translated as he, she, or it, or any other person. We have to know who is the subject. And verbum is the subject. Okay? Who was? What was? Verbum was. All right? So verbum is a substantive noun. It's a substantive noun, but even more importantly, verbum is the subject. Verbum is the subject of the verb erat. Verbum is what we're talking about in this sentence. In the beginning was the Word. Now, if you look up verbum in the dictionary, you'll find it. And you'll find it because verbum is the nominative form of that noun. That's the dictionary form. That's the name. Verbum. If you look it up in the dictionary, that's what you'll see. If you look up principio in the dictionary, you won't find the word principio. You'll find principium. You'll find the nominative case form in the dictionary. Verbum is the nominative case form because the nominative case form is used to identify the subject of a verb. Got that? The nominative case form is used to identify the subject in a sentence, the subject of a verb. So verbum is the nominative case. It is the dictionary case. Verbum is a second declension noun. Verbum is neuter. And verbum is singular. And it means the word. Now these characteristics, that it's second declension, it's neuter, it's singular, and it's in the nominative case, those characteristics will become important later in the translation. Because if you use a pronoun to stand in place of a noun, listen to me on this. If you use a pronoun to stand in place of this noun, it has to have the same characteristics. So you have to choose a form of the pronoun, and the pronoun is going to have to be neuter and singular, just like the noun that it stands in place of. So the noun, the characteristics of the noun control the characteristics of the adjectives and pronouns you use, because they're based on the noun. All right? So that's 4 words in Latin. 4 words. And in your Latin reading lesson, all you have to learn is in, beginning, was, word. Very easy in the Latin reading lesson. But what I want you to see is that there is a ton of information behind the scenes in these words. And grammar, the study of grammar, allows you to unpack all of that information. You understand that? So if you study Latin reading, you just are going to memorize the translation. And that's fine if that's what you'd like to do. You just like to learn to translate some Latin, that's fine. But if you study grammar, you'll not only learn the translation of this, but you'll learn the reason for the translation. Why is the translation what it is? And when you look in a dictionary and you see that many of these words have 5, 10, 15 different possible meanings, how can you make a decision as to what meaning to use in the translation? That's all based on grammar. Okay? So when we study Latin reading, it helps us to get started. But in order for us to really understand the language, we have to study grammar. It's like a car. If you want to use a car, what do you need? You need gas and a key. Right? And you can spend your whole life driving cars, and all you need is gas and a key. But you don't understand how the car works, and if the car breaks down, you have no idea what to do. You sit there with your key and you try to start it, but if the car doesn't run and something's wrong, your little fantasy world with gas and a key won't help you. But if you study how the car actually works, and one day you realize you have gas in the car and you're turning the key and it won't start, you have the understanding to figure out what's causing the car not to start, and you can fix your car and keep driving. The same thing is true in language. Latin reading is like having gas and a key. You can sit here and learn the translation by memorizing the lesson, but you don't understand why it's like that. And if you were to look at some other Latin that you weren't taught the translation for, you're not going to be able to read it. Okay? It's like when a math teacher teaches you how to do a problem and you think you're smart because you can copy what the teacher did, maybe even get good grades. But then if the problem changes, or if it's a different problem and it's a little bit different, all of a sudden you have no idea what to do because you didn't learn the principles and the rules of math. You just learn to copy what the teacher shows you to do. But if the problem changes, you have no idea what to do. And so you'll hear kids complain and say, "We never studied this problem before." That's because they're not learning arithmetic. They're just copying the teacher. So Latin reading is helpful, but Latin reading has to be combined with grammar study, which is much harder if you're really going to understand the translation. Okay, so tons of information packed into this reading that grammar unlocks for you. Okay? In principio erat verbum. So that's just 4 words. So let's take a look at another group of words. Et verbum erat apud Deum. Et verbum erat apud Deum. We have about 10 minutes left. Et verbum erat apud Deum. Now, this word et, anyone know what part of speech it is? Just think, are there different forms of the word et, or is there just one form? One form. So you know it has to be one of the last 4 parts of speech. Preposition, adverb, interjection, or conjunction. All right? If you look it up in a dictionary, you'll find that it means and. It's a conjunction. What the word et does is it joins this phrase to the phrase we just read. It joins the 2 phrases together. In principio erat verbum. There's one idea. In principio erat verbum. And here's a second idea. Verbum erat apud Deum. This is the second idea. But the 2 ideas are joined together by this conjunction et, which means and. And it tells us, keep these things together. That's the purpose of a conjunction. Okay, you understand that? A conjunction joins ideas together. In the beginning was the Word, and keep that in mind, and verbum erat apud Deum. We have verbum again here. In the last part of the sentence, we said that this is the subject of the verb. It's a nominative case, it's neuter, and it's singular. And I know you haven't necessarily studied all that grammar yet, but I'm just telling you, we learn the characteristics of the noun. We saw that in the first part of the sentence, and here we see the same word. Now, that doesn't mean, just because the spelling of the word is the same, it doesn't mean all the characteristics are the same. Because when you study the forms of nouns, you'll see that a couple of different cases can have the same form. And that's true of verbum. If we look at the declension of verbum, the nominative singular form is verbum, or verbum. The genitive form is verbi. The dative form is verbo. But the accusative form is verbum again. The vocative form is verbum again. And the ablative form is verbo, which is the same as the dative form. So we've got three forms that are exactly the same. So just because the word looks the same doesn't necessarily mean that all the characteristics are the same. Do you understand that? All right? So it's a little more complicated than just matching words. Because three different forms of that word actually look the same. But in this word, it actually is the subject. It is nominative, singular, and neuter, just like in the first part of the sentence. So it's the same. It means, and the word erat. Now we know what that verb means, right? It's imperfect tense. And the erat tells us that it's third person. It means he, she, or it. And it's translated was because it's past tense. So we know that verbum was. The verbum was. What do we have here? Apud. What part of speech is apud? Does it have other forms? No. It's one of the last four parts of speech. It's a preposition. If you look it up in a dictionary, it will tell you that apud is a preposition. So it must be followed by an object of a preposition, just like in principio. Now we have apud deum. They go together because this is a prepositional phrase. And if you look apud up in a dictionary, you would learn that apud is a preposition and it's always followed by a noun in the accusative case. When we look at deum, if we looked up deum in the dictionary, we wouldn't find it. We wouldn't find deum in the dictionary because that's not the nominative form of the word. If we look that word up in a dictionary, we'll find deus. That's the nominative form in the dictionary. We'll see the genitive form is dei. The dative form is deo. The accusative form is deum. Pronounced deum, right? The accent is always... I just emphasize the ending sometimes because the endings change. Deum. But if you look at the ending, it's If you look at the case, it's accusative. If you look at this preposition, it requires an accusative. That's why this is deum, because that form is the accusative form of deus. It has to be accusative because this preposition desires an accusative form after it. Okay? If we look this up in the dictionary, we'll see that this preposition means with. It means in the presence of. Was, with, apud. It doesn't mean with, like I went to the store with my friend. That's a different idea of with. That just means people did something together, like they were companions. This idea of with means in the presence of, was before, right? You are with me in the idea of apud. You are before me. You are with me in my presence. Okay? Apud. The word was with Deum, God. Deum is in the accusative form. It's a substantive noun. It's the object of the preposition apud. This is called a prepositional phrase. Here's our preposition. It requires an accusative case. Here is our object, and it's in the accusative case because it follows the preposition apud, which needs an accusative case. It's translated with God. All right? So, there's a lot of information packed into these sentences in Latin. Grammar unwraps all of that for us. Grammar allows us to see behind the scenes and understand what's going on. You understand that? If you don't know grammar, all you can do is memorize translations. But you don't know why. You don't know if it's right or not. You can just memorize the translation. If you know grammar, you can see a translation and understand why it's translated like that. Okay? A lot of times people are confused when they read something. They read verses in the Bible and they say, that's confusing. I don't understand what that... A lot of the times the understanding of why or what it actually means requires you to know grammar. It's not what you think it is because the grammar would show you that it actually has a different meaning. Okay? So we just went through 9 words. In principio erat verbum, et verbum erat apud Deum, and we had all of that information. You see that? Okay? So what we're going to do each lesson, in our second lesson, we're going to take some time just to look at the vocabulary. It won't always go this slow. It went this slow because this was the first time we did this. But in the future, in the first class, we'll go through the translation, the easy way, just memorizing the meaning of the translation. And in the second class, we'll talk about why the translation is what it is. We'll look at Latinity. We'll look at the vocabulary. We'll talk about the forms. We'll talk about different expressions and what they mean, and so on. Okay? You got all that? So that should motivate you. That should motivate you in your study of Latin grammar. Because as you learn Latin grammar, when you learn Latin grammar, you're going to understand what's going on in Latin. You're going to be able to study the translation and not just know what the translation is, but you're going to know why the translation is what it is. All right? So I hope that these second classes on these translation exercises helps us to understand the Latin better. And like I said, I can't type all this stuff up in a lesson. The lessons would be 50 pages long. So we'll go through the translation with the printed lesson text in our first class meeting, and then we'll have a second class meeting where we'll talk about the vocabulary and the grammar a little bit. And we'll do that in video, and we'll always do that for every lesson in Latin reading. So take a minute. At the end of your notes, write a brief summary. What did we talk about in this class? What did we cover? Write a brief summary, and that's all for this second class for lesson 1 in Latin reading.